Duchenne muscular dystrophy, a narrative on the financial burden of disease.
A community project by Danielle Balestra,
Sophie Callahan,
and Andrew Kapinos. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a genetic disorder that results in progressive skeletal and cardiac muscle degeneration. As dystrophin is found on the X chromosome, it primarily affects young boys. It is caused by a genetic mutation in the dystrophin gene that renders this protein non-functional.
The dystrophin protein is localized to the skeletal muscle membrane and is responsible for recruiting its associated proteins that comprise the dystrophin glycoprotein complex. In DMD, this complex is absent, subjecting the muscle membrane to contractile-induced injuries. Chronic muscle injury eventually causes skeletal muscle cells to lose their regenerative capacity.
This disease affects 1 in 3,500 boys. Most patients only live into their late teens. Like we mentioned, DMD is a progressive disease. Skeletal muscle damage initially presents in walking problems starting at the age of 2 or 3. Eventually, around the age of 8, they lose their ability to walk and require a wheelchair. As skeletal muscles lose their regenerative capacity, boys with Duchenne have limited use of their arms. By around 16, they require ventilation at night, then 24 hours. Ultimately, cardiac muscle damage leads to heart failure and, unfortunately, death in their mid-20s. Managing this progression requires an interdisciplinary approach.
Clinical care practices for Duchenne often involve physicians from fields such as neurology, orthopedics, psychiatry, cardiology, and endocrinology. Studies have shown that the average medical costs of care for Duchenne in the U.S. is about $54,000 per year. However, medical costs are just the tip of the iceberg.
When factoring in total costs, one study found that families ultimately pay about $120,000 each year. This is 7 times higher than the mean per capita health expenditure in the U.S. Especially for a typically unexpected condition, these costs can put extreme unanticipated stress on families.
When you break down the total financial burden, medical expenses make up only 34% of the total cost. These include hospital admissions, physician visits, medical tests, and medications. Alternative expenses account for 66% of the total cost. These include non-medical community services, aids and devices, informal care, and indirect costs.
Besides medical bills, families are burdened with making accommodations to households, their schooling, and support system in everyday life outside their clinical care. Non-medical community services refer to utilization of transportation services, programming, and community connection as patients move through their life and school. This disease is very fast-moving, but it is also marked with distinct stages in the boy's health that require specific adjustments to their lifestyle. Aids and devices serve to increase their independence and enhance their quality of life. Such devices include wheelchairs, breathing aids, and 24-hour care.
Individuals with DMD are typically unable to work due to their condition, which prevents them from providing for themselves financially. Patients may also require a 24-hour caregiver to assist in daily activities such as showering, using the restroom, or preparing meals. Typically, family members are caretakers. Parents often take off work to care for their children, which results in overall less household income. Some studies note that 27 to 49% of parents were found to have stopped working or to have reduced their hours as a result of needing to care for their sons. Other indirect costs include remodeling bedrooms and houses to make them more accessible for these patients. Regardless of income, Duchenne poses a financial cost that most families cannot provide for on their own.
Recently, to cover costs, many patients and their families have taken to crowdfunding websites, which have gained popularity over the last few years. Examples include GoFundMe, CrowdRise, and Kickstarter. These platforms allow for fundraising, sharing stories, and raising awareness for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. First, the emergence and rise of social media has opened up this new way to help pay for medical and medically related bills. This has been particularly helpful for low-income families who would otherwise be unable to cover these expenses. Second, It allows people to more personally connect with the people they choose to support through their donations. They know where their money is going. It provides an interface where people from around the world can interact, which empowers those affected. Third, these platforms call attention to rare genetic disorders like Duchenne and bring the needs of those affected from the periphery into the spotlight.
Anthony, a 14-year-old living with Duchenne, utilized Kickstarter to realize his dream of hiking the Grand Canyon. The funds were also used to make a documentary they called Anthony's Adventure, to raise awareness about Duchenne. This is an example of how these platforms can not only help fund medical costs, but can also give boys with Duchenne the ability to participate in activities they otherwise would not be able to, thereby making their dreams come true. This documentary, among many other Duchenne campaigns, show that these platforms allow boys with DMD to define themselves beyond the scope of their disease. They are not just 1 in 3,500.
The yearly cost of providing for a son with Duchenne in the U.S. is currently over $120,000 on average, but it doesn't have to be. Expenses go beyond doctor's visits, medications, and medical tests. Together, including the costs of remodeling lifestyles and providing caregiver assistance, the price for supporting Duchenne poses a financial burden that many families simply cannot afford.
Through research and development, the hope is that a more effective therapy will be found that will alleviate the current costs of Duchenne clinical and lifestyle care.